Good afternoon. Welcome to our Talent and Growth podcast and webinar series. Thank you very much if you're tuning in on LinkedIn Live, and thank you just as much if you are locking on via Spotify, Apple or Google, however you consume your podcasts on the catch up. Today we're talking something which I think is particularly relevant right now, that being the use of TA metrics and turning them into commercial language. And I think at this time in the world when there is so much happening and there's unfortunately so many good TA people on the market, I see this as a skill which we can all get better at and learn more about, and hopefully it could help us be even more effective in our jobs we do now or our future jobs as well. So we're going to dive into this and hopefully get some good takeaways to take with us after. So let's go to our guests and just get some introductions. So Luke, do you want to give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So my name's Luke. So I'm currently head of people and talent at a company called Clearglass Analytics. So we're a fintech company that face off into the investment management industry. I've been in the people and talent space for over 8 years now. Cut my teeth in agency recruitment, moved a pattern for most people, I think. And then I transitioned into more of a people-focused role around 4 years ago, and I was a people partner for quite a large insurtech company called Simply Business, where I was partnering with around a third of the business, primarily on their commercial elements of the business. And then just around 2 years ago, I came here to Clearglass, where I was kind of brought in to set up everything people and talent for the business.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Luke. Shefali, if you give us a little intro to yourself and what you do.
Thanks so much, Paul. My name is Shefali Davda-Banot. I'm the head of talent at Dockler. Dockler provide virtual wards with patients kind of being monitored remotely by specialist clinicians in their own home. And this is fantastic because, of course, it reduces emergency admissions by at least a third, and of course, able to release and discharge patients quickly. And that, in large, is the mission of the organisation. And I joined there 4 months ago. Prior to that, I've worked with other digital health organisations, namely Babylon Health, and a short stint at a company called Helios, and very much kind of operating for just over a decade within people and talent, and very much enjoying my time at Dockler.
Thank you very much, Shefali. And last but not least, Francesca.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Francesca, and I'm head of talent at Conductor, which is a B2B SaaS startup. It's a developer tooling product, so I won't go too much into the details, but basically we help developers with a data streaming platform called Apache Kafka. I've been in talent for about 8 years, similar to Luke and Shefali, and really startups have been my bread and butter. Even now, it's a space I really enjoy, and we'll stop it there.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Francesca. And look, really great to have you all today. And hopefully we can dissect this issue a little bit and get the balance right between the effective talent metrics out there and then how we commercialize those for the business leaders and help us work with them in a better way. So, Francesca, let's start with you, if that's okay. So, for you, how can talent metrics be effectively used to identify and address skills gaps within a company? And then how can we use this info to be conveyed to stakeholders?
Gosh, I mean, there's so many ways, and I think talent metrics are often underutilized in this particular sense. I think one thing I would say is maybe looking at identifying trends. Are we seeing a particular department that's consistently seeing, maybe it's low performance ratings, or maybe it's a high staff turnover? And I think sometimes that, everything else will be looked at. Maybe the management's suffering, or maybe the team is I don't know, not communicating well, but actually maybe it is just a consequence of a skill gap, and actually taking a look at that is something that I think is hugely important when it comes to talent, but it's something that I think can be easily skipped over, for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Francesca. Luke, what about you?
I think for me, understanding the business, like how the business works, how the business makes money, who the clients are, what the processes are, etc., that you have is crucial. And I think when I first stepped into internal recruitment, it was very much about time to hire. How slick were our processes? What was the feedback we were getting from candidates? But you learn quite quickly that that's perhaps not what your stakeholders want to understand all the time. It's important, and it's obviously big for your brand, and it's a reflection of who you are as the people inside the business, but also understanding the impact that hires have, and then being able to portray that in an interview process to a candidate to explain, if you do come into this business, especially in an organization the size that I'm in at the moment, where we're kind of sub 30 people, people can have huge impacts on the business, and that can be the bottom line revenue. That can be like a big initiative that just completely changes something for the business in the space of weeks, months, years. I think that is really crucial. And when you can communicate that in a way to hiring managers, in a way to your stakeholders, in terms of the people that you're bringing through the process, as opposed to, I've got 10 candidates at this stage, I've got 5 at this stage and 2 at this stage. You learn quite quickly in internal recruitment that doesn't really mean a lot. So you need to create a language immediately and make that as a metric, a way that you can show your stakeholders that you're making the right movements in the process.
You mentioned time to hire, Luke. How useful a metric do you think that is?
I think being in large organizations that I've been in, I think it plays a part in terms of board packs that you put together, and in terms of giving those people that are really far removed from a process an understanding of what's exactly going on. When you're more granular and you're dealing in one-to-ones, or maybe you've got a very small team that you lead, I think time to hire is still important to have as an ongoing metric, but I don't think it's necessarily the full picture. I think in terms of the conversions, in terms of the feedback, what are the things that are holding people up at different stages will probably tell you a much better way of how you can solve the problem, as opposed to, can we do this quicker? I think we can all agree that speed is important, and it definitely, time kills deals. It's a well-known adage, but I think that there's other things that you can do to influence the process that are probably more important. So I'll probably put it as something you should keep consistent at, but you shouldn't look at it as, oh, if this is down, that's the only reason why things aren't progressing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, I'm torn with time to hire, because it's something I use for our business as a metric we're quite proud of. But at the same time, if your focus, and a lot of businesses' focus is on getting diversity hiring right, then you need to kind of be prepared that time to hire is going to be a longer game. And actually, sometimes promoting a quick time to hire can be counterproductive for me to getting that diversity hiring right. So it's an interesting debate. But Shefali, for yourself, what talent metrics can be effectively used to identify and address those skill gaps? What stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really do echo kind of what Luke has said in terms of kind of being malleable to your stakeholders, what investors are looking for versus what your C-level and leaders and founders are looking for might be slightly different. And something that I've actually implemented at Dockler within the first 4 months is trying to do a bit of a talent audit. So this isn't necessarily people kind of coming into the business. This is people who are already in the business, creating impact day to day. What skills do they have, and where are their gaps, if there are any? And it's really, really normal to have gaps. Of course, not everyone has everything and every skill, especially in a scale up where what you were looking for 6 months ago may have drastically changed based on new customers, new clients, etc. So it's kind of having this constant conversation with the leaders of the business to understand what we're looking for in terms of talent and skills, and what we've currently got at the moment. And something that we do here at Dockler is do a quarterly performance review, and that's all score based, and therefore you do get data from that to be able to analyze what the gaps are, where training may be required, and these are performance reviews that are self-evaluated, peer reviews, manager reviews, and at large they also get to say what type of training they think they need as people impacting the business. But also every layer has that. So managers have that conversation, peers have that conversation as well. We're also implementing actually a new HR system that will help enable us to bring kind of the whole story together. And again, alluding to Luke's point, it really comes down to kind of what the company mission, the company goals are, or the OKRs for kind of that quarter, and tying those all in together to understand what skills might be needed and how we're looking to achieve that. And I think having those kind of performance metrics are important for both an evaluation point of view, but also understanding on an audit point of view what skills are needed and how to then go about addressing those.
Do you think quarterly is a good, I suppose, a good kind of time period to kind of review and look through these things as kind of as a stand for businesses?
We've actually, it's a good question because it can get quite laborious filling out forms and even so kind of 3 layers. The way I've designed it at Dockler is that every half year we have a 360 review. So that includes peer feedback and kind of twice we have it just as a self-evaluation and a management review. So hopefully there isn't too much time spent on evaluations and form filling and red tape per se. But I think quarterly ties in quite nicely with OKRs and kind of objectives and goals. Certainly in a scale up where I know certainly from working at several startups and scale ups that things do change quarterly, if not more often. So it's important to have those check-ins. And moreover, actually, when we go back to analysis of surveys from employees, they want feedback. They want to know what's happening in the wider company such that their department's goals are outlined as X and therefore their personal goals are Y. And having that kind of broader objective that's then broken down, I think is really important, especially in scale-ups.
Yeah, great. Like it. Francesca, so if we move on, have you got any examples of how companies have used data-driven recruitment strategies to optimize their hiring processes, cut costs, improve outcomes? You've got these kind of success stories to help paint a picture for us?
Yes, I think, to be honest, it probably relates to time to hire would be the stat I'm thinking about. But just going back quickly onto Shefali's point in terms of scale-ups and the conversation changing so often and quarterly, I think one thing I'm noticing at the moment, which maybe makes my stat that I'm about to say maybe a little less relevant than maybe it would have been maybe a year and a half ago, is I think time to hire and its importance is potentially changing a little during this period where we are finding maybe a lot more talent on the market than normal. And actually, maybe we have more options to play with, which is fun. But I also appreciate Luke's point, time to hire. Yes, it can definitely kill a process very quickly when you are taking way too long with a candidate. But at the same time, I do think thinking about startups and scale-ups in particular, where you're more likely to have maybe a closer relationship with the people involved, I think it can be really beneficial to understand where's the benefit here. Is the benefit actually that I hurry this candidate along and get them wrapped in 2 weeks, or is it actually I need to pace it out a little bit and have the hiring manager meet, I don't know, XYZ number of candidates first. But I think in terms of a success story, one thing I found in the past was a previous startup called Sneak. This was in the time of rapid scaling like crazy. So we really were trying to hurry our time to hire. And I think one thing we found was we needed to help our stakeholders and our interviewers understand that interviewing was really, really important to their role. It wasn't just something that we are begging you to do. It was a requirement, and it was seen even from the top down that this is something we want you to spend your time in. So one thing we did was we actually kind of, might sound a little bit strict, but we actually looked at every different level and we looked at the time commitment that we would expect per level of employee for interviewing at the time, and made sure that they were aware of that and that they had the company's backing, which I think was really important, because I think there had been issues where I think they felt like, oh gosh, this is taking time away from other tasks and this will affect my own performance review. Whereas actually, no, hiring is something really, really important across the company. We wanted to communicate that effectively. So that strategy worked really, really well in terms of just breaking down the time. This is the percentage of time each week you can spend interviewing. That's ideal for us. So that's just one small success story.
No, good one. Yeah, I appreciate that. Luke, what about you?
Yeah, I think going back to one of the points you made earlier, Paul, around kind of the optionality, I think also we mentioned at the beginning about, this is quite a hot topic at the moment. I think a lot of people I've seen from LinkedIn at least are in a position where perhaps, unfortunately, they're looking for work at the moment, and they're talking quite openly about how they're kind of selling their experience and what the value add that they can have. And if you find yourself either fortunately in a position in a company that's open-minded to this, or you've kind of put in that work yourself to develop a relationship with hiring managers, and maybe your own manager if you're a recruiter within a wider team, is to really start any conversation about hiring around exactly the impact that it's going to have. If depending on whether you make this hire or not within a certain time frame is one thing, but what is the kind of the impact of just not having that hire at all? And it's quite easy, I find, at least anyway, in the last few companies I've worked in, for a hiring manager or a C-suite member or just anyone in a team to really be able to come back to you and say, well, if we don't have this person, this won't happen, or we won't deliver this, we'll lose this client, or we won't get these clients. And when you're able to kind of show them that you understand this more than just, I'm going to go out and find you this person, I'll come back with this person, we'll shake hands, it's done, we move on, and I'll see you next time we need to hire. It should be more about, okay, well, let's lay out all the options here that we have. One thing you'll find is if you don't explore the other options around internal promotions, in terms of internal mobility, upskilling, training, as Shefali mentioned earlier, you're going to quite quickly find yourself as an internal recruiter as well being left out of the picture. And what I mean by that is that people are feeling these pains firsthand themselves. You've got this kind of KPI or this metric, this goal that you have to fill this role, and that's a clear indicator of how well you're performing. But these people really feel this day to day. They have a pain where they have to work longer hours. They're having to lean more on people and push more on them. What will happen ordinarily is, especially if you work in a small organization, is people will solve these problems for themselves. They'll start to do these things. They'll start to kick in internal ability. They'll start to promote people. They'll start to upskill people or ask people in other teams around the business to step in. If you're not exploring that immediately, you're not showing your worth as someone who can do that, it's also then going to kick you out of that process, I say, and then you'll go away, you'll do all this great work, you'll look at your time to hire, you'll look at how many people you've got in each and every stage, and the problem might solve itself. So I think it's crucial when you're trying to make that jump from just any old recruiter to someone who can be really kind of respected, and kind of your opinion listened to in the business. That is probably the turning point, I think, where you lay out all the options from the get-go. You talk about kind of short-term, long-term, because as we say, some of these roles just aren't possible to turn around in days and weeks. They might take much longer, and we just know people won't allow that to happen if they can do something else about it. So again, big metric for me is, have you explored all the options, and how much have you kind of fulfilled all those options from an exploration perspective?
I think the understanding of that short-term to long-term game is, I digress a little bit. One of the big things you need to get your head around when you transition from agency to in-house, which is, I know you did, Luke, and I didn't. I'm sure maybe the other two did. I don't know, but it's a very common route. Do you think that this kind of mind, this change in how your mind works when you go in-house, do you think that's a big factor with that?
Most definitely. I mean, I think that was one of the first ever bits of feedback that shocked me some 5 years ago, when someone turned around to me, one of the hiring managers I worked with, and said, you're treating this like an agency recruiter. And, and I was like, well, that was me 5 minutes ago. But, you do take that kind of thing to heart, because you do know that there is a switch, and, what you need to understand about the business once you're inside, and once you have all of this information, and one of the things I always think about, I tell this to anyone in any field, but for talent it's particularly important, is when you're new, take full advantage of that. Ask all the questions. You can act like you don't know anything, because everyone thinks that's how you're going to be anyway, right? If you go in and you think, I know this, I know that, I'm just going to go away and fill these roles and I'm going to be happy, going to get promoted and all this other stuff, it just won't happen like that. So yeah, I definitely think there's a mindset switch where you go, okay, whereas before they were my client and I was kind of always having to know everything and be on top of everything, have to even know what the feedback is and whether they want to join you before I maybe even know. Now it's, we're on a, we're a team now. We're working together, we're collaborating. We're going to have to do a team effort to get this person into the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lou. Shefali, anything for you that stands out in terms of an example of how the data-driven recruitment strategies have helped hiring process, reduce costs, outcomes in any form?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of lots of ideas and examples going through my head right now, but I think just as a basis, it's really, really important to have kind of tangible facts and stats to hand in order to kind of make certain hiring decisions, and also to then present that and align with leaders of the business and C-suite. And I'm just thinking of kind of two really clear examples in my experience. I worked with Babylon Health for 2.5 years whilst they were on a massive kind of growth trajectory. And the kind of term was coined of blitz scaling. And kind of, again, alluding to Luke's point, this was almost like acting like a recruitment agency, but in an internal function, because it was all about speed of hiring and getting the right people in at high quality. But really, speed was the element here. And that was really, really clear from all of the leaders of the business. And when speed is the kind of utmost priority, you then ask the question, as talent should, to their leaders and to their stakeholders, is how much do they then want to spend? Because an internal function can only handle so much on delivery, and therefore cost per hire may also go up if the expectation of speed of hiring goes up. And on the converse, here at Dockler, we're taking a real pragmatic approach and a real steady and conscious hiring approach, where we're thinking kind of longer term and the impact of the hire, thinking about career ladders, almost as if we're kind of as in when we're interviewing them as well. So kind of a very kind of steady approach to hiring. Where will this person fit into the organization? What impact will they directly have to either a better client or customer experience, or to a patient's experience? And really what that then in turn means is that we can then reduce cost per hire. So kind of being here for a few months, we've reduced the cost per hire dramatically in the last 4 to 5 months. And that's because we've really aligned on what the business needs are now. So whilst we need people quickly, it's not blitz scaling. It's not, a kind of a rocket ship, where we're looking to hire people within 2 weeks. We don't mind spending 4 weeks to find the right person. And that's absolutely fine. And there's a real people plan in place, in collaboration with finance, to ensure that we're pipelining and also factoring in attrition rates as well, which is a really interesting point that we've not really covered so far amongst our kind of data metrics. But employee turnover has a massive impact on hiring plans and therefore cost per hire and time to hire as well.
I'm going to ask a question about employee turnover in a second, but just a quick one. And this is, Shefali, this isn't, I don't think there's necessarily a right answer to this. I think it differs with each business. But how do you work out cost per hire?
That's a good question. And it is different for each business. I've kind of created a little spreadsheet with all of the fixed costs that we have. So we've got LinkedIn Recruiter and we pay monthly for that. We also have a set budget for jobs that are advertised. So we have that assigned. We used to use agencies, so I have a section for that. I also have a proportion of my time. I think I've kind of segmented off 25% of my basic salary, which of course I won't share on the podcast. And we've got, I've also assigned people operations salary in that as well. And this is someone that helps with the release of contracts and all the kind of back end side of things. Including our ATS and our HR system as well. So I kind of have a set kind of figure and then divide that by the number of hires made.
Does anybody do, Luke and Francesca, do you do anything additional to that in terms of cost per hire? Because it's something I'm quite interested in. Francesca, do you do the same, less or more than that?
Yeah, very similar, breaking down the cost per tool or time as well. I think for me, cost per hire as well. I try to break it down so that if there is turnover or suspected turnover, break it down to look at, okay, how long is this role likely to remain unfilled or just empty? If it's a C-level position, God, who knows how many months it could be. If it's a junior position, the cost might be quite low. But I think that's one thing that at Conductor, we're starting to think about more and more as we are growing as a business as well. What does that internal cost look like to the teams who are losing, I don't know, a leader or just a colleague, etc. It's quite hard to quantify. I guess if I was going to get really granular, I'd maybe look at salaries or an input per day. But at the moment, I'm trying to look at just the bigger picture, really.
I gotcha. Luke, anything to add on that one?
No, I think to be fair, it's all very similar. I think for me, because I've managed kind of almost all the hiring on my own. I mean, that it's quite easy to work out those costs. There's been a little bit of agency use again, so factor that in. One thing I would add is when I was at Simply Business, we went from something around like 400 people to 800 people in about a year and a half. And what we found is as our finance team just kind of matured more and we had finance business partners for each area. One thing that started to kind of become apparent to me is that if a hire was open for a long time, we were a very small team, so not maybe as extreme as Shefali was explaining with Babylon, but it felt like that at times. What we would find is if a role had been open for an amount of time, finance would view that actually as money made. So because we were still operating and our revenues were increasing or staying the same, this cost that they had budgeted in a year in the past for growth had just been sat there. So every month it's kind of like as someone's salary is getting added in. So you go, well, we really need that role right now, and we've got all these other things that we know we do really well directly and organically. So why don't we just add all these, monthly payments up, and that can be an agency fee. And a lot of the time it came in at a fraction of the money that we had accumulated, because this money was kind of from a wider business perspective, was being paid somewhere, but it wasn't actually going anywhere. So at the end of the year, it would have just kind of been written off as this is just excess money. So that would be a bit of a relief kind of lever that we would pull as a TA team from time to time to say, we're about to get this role. We know it's super tricky. Maybe it's like UX design or something like that. Let's just get an agency on that, because if we kind of drop what we're doing now, it's not gonna kind of pan out as something that's really a useful use of our time.
That's really interesting you shared that, because my next thing I was going to ask was, is anybody looking at cost of not hiring? So if you're looking, for instance, to hire an account executive who target to bring in 500 grand each year, if you're looking at, not hiring for 30 days, going to cost this, not hiring for 6 days, going to cost this. Has anybody looked at that at all?
We have. We kind of did a big exercise of this kind of the first quarter of this year. But I think it's really interesting to hear Luke's point, because I think there is always that tug of war between finance wanting to save money and seeing a salary gap as no bad thing. That's just extra, which I think it's great that you turned that into agency usage, because it doesn't always happen, unfortunately. But then you also have that other side where your other stakeholders are saying, I am losing time and money effectively by not having this role filled. So I just thought it was just a really interesting point, because you have so many different sides coming at you there with different teams.
We've experienced the same. So we're looking at a pragmatic view on hiring, and whilst obviously the goal is for most businesses who have an internal function to keep things in-house, we are in the process of looking at, okay, if we are in a situation where things are going to start affecting the business, i.e. not delivering to a client on time, and not kind of keeping to set SLAs, then let's have a backup plan. Let's have a talent consultancy. No plugs, of course, Paul, but someone like the Amino Group who could, of course, come in and quickly troubleshoot, because the cost of not having that person is much higher, either reputationally or, of course, directly, in line with revenue. So it's really important to have that kind of fallback. And of course, we are fortunate that we have quite a robust kind of ecosystem within talent that we can kind of lean on that. And that's something that we definitely are looking to do at Dockler as well.
Thanks, Shefali. Your check is in the post. Luke, did you have something that you want to share on that?
Yeah, I'd say from where I am right now in Clearglass, so I'm an exec member, so I sit with all the people that go out and do sales, run the entire sales process in the business. So for me on a weekly basis as well, it's quite obvious, and it's very kind of immediate, the impact that someone being there or not being there can have. And I think previous roles where I've been slightly further removed, it's always, I think, trickled down in terms of this is the impact we can have. And I'm very fortunate, as I say, to spend a lot of time with hiring managers one-on-one on a weekly basis or fortnightly basis as well. And yeah, that cost of not having someone, especially when you have either a business like Simply Business, where I was before, where they have lots of different things going on, partnerships with huge brands that bring in X revenue, you've got, or X customers, you've got our internal insurance product offering that they have there, and also then the aggregate platform which brings in others. It's very easy for someone to almost kind of say to you straight up, if we don't have this person, this doesn't happen. And that's not just in sales either. I find that it can also be more the case just on a delivery type role. It can be on something to do with engineering. Things can't be built, product things can't be created and ideated either. So I think when you, going back to like my first point, once you have that connection with the business, and once you can present yourself in a way that shows them I do understand, and I want to understand, because it's going to make my job easier, my life easier, and we'll work better together, it's very easy to kind of, for both you and the stakeholder, to then kind of lean into that and say, if we don't do this, this is the outcome, and you understand it. Whereas if you're not taking that sort of care, or you're not having those sorts of conversations, I think it can be lost on you quite easily.
Yeah, with you. Shefali, you mentioned earlier around, employee turnover. So one of my questions I was going to ask was around how can we use workforce analytics to predict and mitigate risks related to that, and then its impact on business continuity?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I think when it comes to turnover, it's difficult. A lot of people don't necessarily give off signs that they want to leave, and this is why I think having those pulse polls or surveys, quarterly surveys, or even more regularly kind of bite-sized surveys is really important to understand the employee engagement levels and where employees are at. And then not just taking those kind of results and not doing anything with them, but also then creating almost an action plan that you share amongst those who've filled out the survey, and creating a work in progress to say, okay, this is the problem and we want to fix it. We identify that this isn't right. For example, pension is statutory, and actually we'd like to go to an employer that's taking their benefits further seriously than you are. So kind of creating a mini project with set deadlines that the whole business holds you accountable for, I think definitely boosts retention, because it shows interest levels from high level, that there's change about to come about, and business change about to be seen. I was having a look at some stats earlier around employee kind of retention and turnover, and I read somewhere, and don't hold me to where I read it, but I read somewhere that 68% of employees who quit could have been retained. And following on from that, I was also kind of thinking about past experiences. And I remember someone saying to me, people often leave managers, not necessarily a business, and what the business does. And I think that those are two really important points, because if you have a good person who wants to leave because of their manager, I think that could be resolved quite quickly, but it's about having open communication within a business to be able to unfold that, whether that be kind of asynchronously through surveys and polls, or through buddy system, or through a kind of a founder's coffee. So in startups, this is quite a common kind of ground now, where you can have a one-to-one coffee with one of the founders of business, and be able to share with them, some of the issues that you're facing in a really natural and neutral space, and that not be kind of judged upon. And this is having trust in your hiring process as well, to say that whilst that person might not get along with their manager, this person should stay for their own merits. And so how can we kind of internally mobilize them? So there's a few things linking here. There's the employee turnover piece, but also how can we keep the hire, keep them further engaged? And do we need to look at different programs to be able to do that? Do we need to look at internal mobility? Should we be looking at refining our benefits program? Do we need to increase our flexibility? Is it that we're not doing enough for diversity and inclusion in the workplace? So there's lots of different facets of why someone might want to leave, and it's about unfolding those and uncovering those to be able to kind of really gain further insight.
Yeah, some really interesting points there. Thanks, Shefali. I used to do quite a bit of work with Computer Weekly, and we used to, in a previous life, the business side, and we used to produce their yearly tech surveys around what people wanted in the tech industry. And I don't think it's changed too much. And I think one of the key things was always that when people are deciding to look for a new position, when they've actually right, I'm definitely leaving, then salary is really, really important. But it's typically not one of the main reasons people leave. The thing that triggers people is usually, like you're saying, around that lack of communication, bad manager or bad relationship with the manager, no idea where they're going with their career, not flexible working. So I believe that stat of the 68%, of people who did leave could have been retained. And I think there's lots of things companies can do, but you have to tap into what is it people want, listen to them, find out what they need, and hopefully implement it. Francesca, what are your thoughts around that on the workforce analytics and maybe even reducing turnover?
I think for me, everything Shefali has said really plays into, it's so important to build such a strong relationship between people and talent. Occasionally, the departments are working as one. Sometimes they're a bit siloed. And I think as you grow as a company, or maybe if you're part of a larger company, it would be very easy for the two to be siloed and to focus on different metrics. But everything affects the other, I would say. So things like employee surveys, incredibly important. If certain departments are not very happy, or perhaps there is a low performance, why is that? And I think it's very important that talent find out what could happen there. What is the potential? What can we change? And I think equally, with talent, there's a lot of data and information that we are exposed to on a daily basis. Typically, I'd say, wider market trends. Are we seeing, certain companies, are kind of falling apart, or maybe it's, comp in the market is changing. What's happening there? That I think a lot of people in HR professionals might not have as good an overview of, just because they're not necessarily reading about talent news every single day like we are. And I think that is hugely important, because it really gives you, like you say, was it Computer Weekly, the surveys you did previously, they are so interesting to find out why are employees moving. It changes year on year. And I think especially over the last few years with COVID and more flexible working, etc., and cost of living crisis, it's quite fascinating to see why things are changing and to bring that knowledge into the organization.
Absolutely. And I think it reminds me, I had a podcast episode last year which got quite a lot of commentary it was with Tim Sackett, and Tim, the title of it really was why talent acquisition should be involved with retention. And quite a few people pushed back, said, no, TA is about getting people in, it's not about keeping people there. But I think in this market right now, if I'm working in a permanent job in TA, I know obviously there's a mixture of experience in this room here because you're working talent and people roles. But if your role is TA, I'm going to be looking to get involved in as many parts of the business as I can, and using my data and my influence to work with the people side, the HR side, the marketing side, anything, because that kind of getting involved in those other elements of the business, in terms of, as well as especially what's keeping people in the business, is hopefully going to be what might be the reason which keeps you in the business later on. And we obviously know many good people on the market right now. Luke, anything for you on the workforce analytics piece and retention?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think really good points. And I think people always talk about this when, if you sit down and read a textbook, or if you have an interview for one of the roles that the three of us do, the four of us do, you talk about the life cycle of people and talent, and you talk about how you operate in all of them, and how you add so much value to all of them, and I think it's sometimes quite easy to forget that it's a hygiene thing with talent. It's about all the way from the beginning to the very end. And once you have people in the business, which is, I think we've spoken about quite a lot already, once you've got them in, it's then, the things that you've discussed prior to them joining, the motivations that you understood from the interview process, but also a continuation. Like, one of the things that I brought in almost immediately was PDPs into this business, because there wasn't before, and there was a lot of just great, really talented, high performing people who were just cracking on, doing an amazing job, as they still do now. But it was like, but what's next? Where are you going to go after this? Let's create some paths, or dare I say ladder. It's more of a jungle gym, isn't it? Your career. But because that is a big part of how you keep people infused, engaged in the business. One of the things, just very quickly, that I looked into at Simply Business, sounds like I had a lot of free time, but we actually got to a point where we were looking at this very unique thing, which I believe was written by one of the big four, I think it might have been Deloitte, around a group of people that are called captives. And this was actually interestingly written before COVID, but it was never more prevalent than during COVID times. And now, probably given the state of the market as well for TA and people professionals, it's even bigger. And it's this idea that you'll have people who, on the surface, they're happy, they kind of do a job, or the job that's labeled out, but they're never going to blow you away, and they're not the people that are going to really, if you're a scaling business, they're not going to be the ones that take you there. There'll be others that do that for you. I'm not a big fan of that ABCD and 1, 2, 3s and 4s, because I think that's probably written by people who think they're 1As or A1s or whatever it's called. But I do genuinely believe, and we looked at the data at Simply Business, and there was a scary amount of people that we, given a few different factors and different metrics that we put into place, tenure, how long typically people leave, and the kind of the quality of those people that leave within those certain timeframes within different departments. We saw that, I think it was something around like 30% of people really probably should have moved on. And when you look at why that is, it's because, to Shefali's point, you have all these different kind of columns. Are the benefits good? Yes. Is the salary good? Yes. Have they, how much work does this person do? What's the impact that they have? It's good. But then other things are neglected, because you see these kind of things, people are staying. That's great. Someone's done 10 years, someone's done 15 years. This is amazing. But when you look at the kind of the market data, you take like a step back and look at what's going on outside of your business. You go, is that actually the best thing for us? We're trying to hit this big milestone. We're trying to take this next big step as a business. And that's what will happen if you don't kind of keep up the hygiene. The first thing is getting people in. Then it's about keeping them engaged and fused. But if you kind of drop off, you stop doing PDPs after a year, or you stop giving, promotions or doing an annual review, you'll quickly find this kind of subgroup within your organization again that don't move on. And when the push does come to shove, and you've got these hard times like we have now, these are probably the people that get hit first for no fault of their own. As I say, doing the job, building their profile in the same way that some might, because of this neglect that often happens in terms of the aftercare once someone's in a business. And I would put that down to a combination of the manager, people team, and as you said, Paul, if you can bring TA professionals into that to give a perspective of what they're hearing on the market, what people are saying when they want to join the company, it would just, I think, eradicate that as a problem a lot quicker.
Yeah, absolutely agree. TA are the eyes and ears of the market, and both externally and internally. So absolutely with you on that. Thanks, Luke. Francesca, moving on, what are some innovative ways to measure and communicate the effectiveness of D&I initiatives in terms of business performance and innovation?
Gosh, I think it's a big question. There are so many different ways that I think you can look at it. I think personally, I like to measure this success rate on kind of a quarterly and an annual basis. I think you do need that longer amount of time in some cases to see the impact. But I think in terms of D&I, I think looking at some of the major benefits that we state all the time, and this is why we are, putting this emphasis on D&I, it is to encourage diversity of thought. It is to encourage, reduce employee turnover and improve financial performance of the business. Let's look at all of those stats as well once we've actually hopefully managed to accomplish some of our goals in hiring for D&I. I think one thing for me is looking at the performance of teams. So usually I like to set, a goal, and it might be focused on a certain aspect of D&I, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity, or whatever it could be. It might be certain departments. Okay, so we've obviously we've hired, we've gone out, hopefully we've succeeded. What's been the impact of that maybe a year on? And it might take that amount of time to see the difference as well. It could be a case of, has the overall happiness score improved of the team, or has anyone been promoted in the team? Who has been promoted? I think there's so many different ways to measure it, and I think it can get a bit overwhelming actually, but I think it's really, really important to look at the success rate that you've had, so you can use it obviously in the future to show, okay, we did XYZ and this is the result, and it was great. So those are just a few thoughts coming to my mind off the bat.
Thank you very much. Shefali, anything on the DEI side?
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite topics. I'm really, really passionate about kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's never been such a strong case, like more than now ever. Whether that be kind of right at the top of a business, kind of having a diverse group of execs kind of making decisions on the table, and it's so obvious why this is important. But of course, just to state a few, it's that diversity of thought. It's going to be kind of having that return of investment in revenue, and kind of making decisions. And one of the examples that I love talking about is, I think it was Apple. At one point, their product team was all male, and I believe they released an iPhone that was so large that it didn't even kind of comfortably fit into a woman's hand. And this is such a great example. And I think there's a few more. I think there's a seatbelt example by one of the car manufacturers as well. And these are really kind of tangible examples that you can provide to stakeholders to say, this is why we need a diverse team. This is not just talking about gender. This is not just talking about ethnicity. This is talking about every kind of aspect and facet of diversity, so that we are able to serve our clients and customers, and in our instance, our patients, accordingly. And that example about Apple is fantastic, because it just goes to show that having an all-male product team really didn't work out well for them for that particular release. And similarly, there's going to be business kind of use cases for each and every business, as to why it's pivotal and important. But certainly kind of at that exec level, those people making the decisions in a room, it's really important. And, of course, there are lots of data and metrics around this. I think McKinsey releases a yearly report. I think the last one last year was about, a significant amount of many businesses were set a goal to have at least 60%, or I think it was 55% of their kind of advisors, board, or senior execs to be women. So these are important stats released by companies in order to have that serious gain. And I think the real struggle for startups, and I'd love to hear from kind of colleagues and peers on this, is kind of convincing senior stakeholders, C-level founders, as to the real day-to-day importance of celebrating certain milestones, of having kind of hiring in certain bandwidths. It's not necessarily kind of an immediate ROI, like Francesca alluded to. It can take perhaps even a number of years to demonstrate the benefits of having a diverse team. And even if it's not towards the product or to customers directly, I think there is a great thing that can be said around employee engagement and happiness when there is a diverse school of thought. But but there's still questions around how to convince, and you know, I think this is an ongoing conversation between many talent leaders of you know, of our day, as to how to put that at the forefront of hiring amongst other subjects.
Fantastic, thanks, Shefali. Luke, anything to add on that, on Shefali's point or the original question?
Yeah, I've to be fair, like the two of them have answered it perfectly, and I think the only bits that I would have left is the bit around you know, equity, in terms of like people feeling like they have a stake in the business, or they feel like they have an impact in the business. Again, very easy to achieve the smaller the company you are, hopefully. Harder to do once you scale up and you get big. The other thing I'd probably add is, you know, you really want, you know, the proof in the pudding. When people actually come into your interview process, when people join the business, they want to see the things that you talk about and you celebrate. I think it's very easy, especially with, you know, humongous businesses, to, you know, put up you know, a flag, or to say that we're celebrating something, or we recognize something, or we're aware of something. You need to get into those businesses, and the more exposure you can give to someone in the process to see this, you know, we actually mean what we say. You know, we're very fortunate as a business that we're global, and we've got a number of cultures, number of different religious backgrounds as well that we have in the organization, and we do something called Human Updates, which is an opportunity for teams to present each individual in the team. Again, very hard if you're a massive company, but to talk about what they do, not just about, you know, hobbies and other things like that, but for our team in India, you know, we're blessed here in the UK. We see all these amazing festivities that they have, all these different celebrations that they have, which, you know, we know what it's like in the UK. It's like, oh, thank God there's a bank holiday. Whereas, you know, for them, it's just a completely different outlook. And once you learn about one another and you share the, you know, those experiences, and we've, you know, created that culture where people feel confident to do that. You know, we had one person with us previously who would share a lot about Judaism and you know, all the different things that they were doing, the sacrifices they were making, and it was great. And you know, people really wanted to understand that and ask questions about that in a room of, you know, 30 people. Whereas, you know, other places it can be a bit more of like a, dare I say it, like a virtue signal. So I think if you live it, breathe it, it's so easy for then the rest to come. And I think, you know, Shefali's point around convincing people is a really big one. I think the more you can do and the smaller steps you can take, you know, funding, you know, a group of people that are maybe from a particular culture or ethnic background. I've seen a lot of that. Like we had South Asian group in Simply Business. We also had like our Black History Month as well that was carried out Simply Business, and these groups where people come in and they share experiences as well, which are sometimes a little bit more emotional than perhaps some of the other things that you would celebrate. It's all part of it, and I think it makes it a lot more real. So I think if you can live it, breathe it, and not just kind of talk about it externally, it's a massive win for any business.
Yeah, it needs to be 100% authentic. Absolutely. Yeah. Agree with that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks all. So, Luke, I'll stay with you on this one, actually. So how can, I suppose I want to look at how TA can work well with other parts of the business. So how can TA professionals work collaboratively with other departments to align talent strategies with the overall business objectives? And then how can this cross-functional approach be highlighted to investors or key stakeholders?
Yeah, very good question. Big question. I think that you can start off at home. I think Francesca said this before, is that, you know, as a people team, it can become very siloed. And I think it's very easy when you've got a lot of roles to hand, you know, maybe you're working on 10 plus roles at any given time, to just say, that's my focus because, you know, that's what I'm going to be judged on. I think you really have to lean into the team around you, the experts that you have, and also communicate that. So when I've worked in a bigger people team, the one at Simply Business was like 30 plus people just in the UK. That's made up of benefits, payroll. It's made up of people operations, all these different great places. I think the more touch points you can have is just one way of concreting the professionalism and the maturity of the people team. So then when you go out to the rest of the business, whether that's one-to-one with a hiring manager, whether it's presenting to the executive team, whatever it might be, you've already done all the hard graft. Because I think what a lot of the time can do is you can get kind of caught up and you can slip up in progressing really quickly with one of these kind of silos within the people team, and then the rest isn't on board, or that they haven't got your buying. So I think it's always about kind of starting at home and then slowly progressing, taking that out. And I would just say, as a talent professional, one of the things that I loved when I first started at Simply Business was I'd go to every town hall. I'd go sit in a product pod and listen to what they're working on. I'll go spend some time, sitting around the more commercial areas where they talk about deals, deal sizes, potential clients. And then I would just, as anyone should, piece that into my sales pitch for because those numbers change all the time. You don't want to say, we're trying to get X amount of customers, and then when you're talking about something that's a year old, and it's kind of a bit stagnant. So always try and kind of just increase your knowledge of the business, what's going on. Don't get too stuck behind with the last announcement or the last goal. Always keep on top of things, because that's one thing I found, that going from agency to internal, all these things are just at your fingertips, and people want to give it to you. People love talking about what they do for a living, right? People love telling you how great the thing that they're working is on. Let them do it, and then use the bits that you want to use, and that will take you very, very far, I think.
Thanks, Luke. Francesca, what do you think?
I'd agree, and I think maybe taking it to the next step is driving those cross-functional projects as well. I think sometimes teams, they want to work with you but aren't necessarily sure how to work with talent outside of, I'm hiring for a role now and I need you. I think that might be a case of maybe it's engineering and product. I'm going to take a stab in the dark and think that they are pretty data-driven themselves. It's likely that they'll be interested to see your talent metrics and how you can work together in that sense, maybe more than any other department, or whether it's marketing and thinking about how we can partner up on employer branding and getting to know just how we can work together more across the year. What are their goals? What are our goals? I think that's something that can sometimes be underestimated when it comes to talent. Like Luke and Shefali have both said, it's not just about just filling the roles and then leaving for the day. It is becoming a crucial part of the business. And I think being involved as well in that strategic planning at a high level is crucial, so you can understand what are the objectives here. It's not, yes, it is to fill seats, but it is so much more than that as well. So that's what I would say.
Fantastic. And Shefali, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of what Francesca and Luke have already said, and echo what they've said. It's this combination of looking at all the different business departments and how talent outside of hiring can collaborate. So marketing, employer branding. I'm working with finance at the moment to do a people plan for every single department, and that's for every single kind of quarter left. We've got a project ongoing at the moment with our clinical function to understand pipelining. So we're in the business of providing clinicians to patients and connecting the two. But with sales, we don't necessarily understand at the moment what's in their pipeline. So it's collaborating finance, clinical finance, and talent, and the four of us culminating together to understand what pipeline should look like, and where the budgets need to align. We're aligning with commercial and with marketing on employee swag, and so there's so many different collaborations where we're talking to kind of every single department now about exit interviews, and at the moment that's something I conduct. But what we are really keen to do is to ensure all the messages from exit interviews then get sent back to each and every department, so that, again, a talent audit, a skills gap can be curated from that. So they all kind of, the communication of all departments is centralized, in my opinion, by kind of people and talent. And it's a constant cycle that kind of keeps on running, especially within those kind of core teams that all are dependent, they're codependent on each other. So that's really important.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think that brings us to the top of the hour. And thank you three for this conversation. I think we've talked a lot about talent metrics and commercial metrics. We've also talked about other things as well. It's been a real a lovely medley of a conversation. I think it's really going to help anyone listening to this to get better at their role in terms of the company they're working in or with. So thank you so much. Thank you for locking on and listening to us today. Next week, we're going to be talking around how to support neurodivergent talent in the workplace. So do tune in for that. But again, thank you to our speakers today, and I'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.